All right, so still in geometric sequences, remember that it's geometric because we're multiplying now as our pattern. And so I just want to show you a couple more examples, just kind of keeping with the same thing, but the pattern's going to look a little different. So for this example, the sequence is 90, or it starts with 90. It goes to 30, then 10, then 10 over 3, and 10 over 9, and keeps going. So this is going to look a little bit different because now the numbers, if you look at it as a whole, they're getting smaller. So we're not technically multiplying. If you look at this, we're going from 90 to 30, so the numbers are getting smaller, and then going 30 to 10, and then it goes into fractions. So we're actually going to be dividing by a number each time. So going from 90 to 30, it would be 90 divided by 3 equals 30. And then from 30 to 10, you're dividing by 3. 10 to 10 over 3, I'm just writing it as a fraction instead of decimals. But for this one, we're dividing by 3 each time. So it's still geometric. This is still going to be our R. But what we're going to do is still write it as multiplying because this is still what the equation looks like. So for our R in this scenario, we're still going to write it as being multiplication. And so for writing the equation of this sequence, we're still starting with A1, which is the first number in the list. That would be 90. But for our R, because we're dividing by 3, I want to write it as a multiplication. So this is the tricky part about this. If I'm dividing by 3, that's the same thing as saying I'm multiplying by 1 over 3, or 1/3. So I know that this may be difficult to try to think about, but that is the way that we're writing it. So instead of multiplying by a number, or sorry, instead of dividing, because that's what the pattern is saying, is we're dividing by 3. In the equation, though, you still write it as multiplication. That's why we have to say multiply by 1/3 instead of divide by 3. And then n minus 1 is still that exponent on top of it. So this is the equation for the pattern of this sequence. And again, the weird part is just writing it as a multiplication each time. So before we do anything else, I just want to show you another example of doing the same thing. So as another sequence, we're going to start with -16, and then +8, -4, +2, -1, and it's going to keep going. Think about the pattern. So this is something that you're going to have to look at and try to figure out. The numbers are getting smaller, so it goes from 16, 8, 4, 2, 1, but the signs are also changing. So if it starts with a negative and it goes to a positive number, negative number, positive number, that means there's a negative number. For this sequence, going from 16 to 8, you're dividing by 2. But because, oh goodness, because the signs are changing, it is going to be a -2. So it's -16 divided by -2 is +8. Then do the same thing. It's +8 divided by -2 gives you -4. And then -4 divided by -2 is +2. So for this one, going to each number, or going to the next number in the list, we're dividing by -2. And so what that means is for our R in the equation, instead of writing an equation with a division, we're going to write it as multiplication. So because it's negative, our R is negative, but because we're dividing by a 2, we're going to write it as a 1/2. So the equation is going to be A1, so negative 16 is that first number. And we're multiplying by negative 1/2 because we're dividing by negative 2. And then n minus 1 is the exponent on top. I'm sorry, that looks really messy. But it's negative 16 times negative 1/2 is in the parentheses. So that's how we're going to be writing equations when it is a division, is the pattern. I do want to give you one more example. So for this sequence, we're going to start with the number 4. It goes to 2, 1, 1/2, and 1/4, and keeps going. I want to write the equation. So in order to do that, I need to know what the pattern is. So this is where you have to look at, well, how is it changing? So go from 4 to 2, you're dividing by 2. Then go from 2 to 1, divide by 2. 1 to 1/2 is dividing by 2. And I'm not going to trick you. It will be the same thing each time, so it should match that it's the same thing happening going to each number. So for the equation, an equals the first number times r. So if we're dividing by 2, we're writing 1/2 in the parentheses. So it's writing it as multiplication. Technically, you're dividing by 2. That's right. But in the equation, to keep it similar, that way the equation looks the same every time, we're going to write it as a multiplication, which is why we're changing it into a fraction. So once you have the equation, just like this, I am going to add one more thing saying find the next number or find a certain term. And actually, I'm going to do another example to show you that. So this is writing the equation for this sequence. We're going to try one more because I know that this is a little bit difficult, so I'm going to show you more examples with this type of thing. Let's say the sequence starts with 125, goes to 25, then 5, 1, and keeps going. I want to write the equation. So again, that means you need to know what the pattern is. A lot of these are going to be similar numbers to what we've seen before, like perfect squares or perfect cubes. So if you don't know right off the bat, divide them. So do 125 divided by 25, see what you get. So that's actually a number 5. And then 25 divided by 5 is 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So that's kind of what gives you that pattern. So if you don't know just by looking at it, just divide these first two numbers. That'll give you this, what the difference is. And so writing the equation for this, it would be an equals the first number times r, but because we're dividing by 5, oh, sorry, you are dividing by 5. It's a 1/5 in the equation. And so again, this is the way that we're going to write that pattern for the nth term. For this one, instead of trying to find a specific number, I just want you to find the next two terms. So that means I want to try to find the next two numbers in the list. So if it goes 125, 25, 5, 1, I want to know what this number is and the next one. So if we keep with the pattern, divide by 5, well, 1 divided by 5 would be, let me rewrite it. So if you keep dividing by 5, this would be 1/5. And if you take 1/5 divided by 5, that is 1/25. And you can use calculators for this. I know that sometimes fractions get a little confusing, and I am going to have, or you do have access to a free Inspire online. And again, on Google Classroom, I have the link to that you can access the calculator where you can divide fractions. So these would be the two next terms. And that's geometric sequence. So it's a little bit different. You're still multiplying, or we're still writing it as multiplication, but because you're dividing by a number, you just write it as a fraction. So please, please let me know if you have any questions or pop into my Zoom tutoring session, but make sure that you can complete the practice assignment first before you do the Google Forms. Let me know if you have questions.